Welcome back, everyone. My name is Matt Charnay. I'm the Jewish Life and Interfaith Coordinator here at DePaul University, and you are watching Quirk Live. Welcome back to another fun installment. Today's topic is self-care. I'll let the amazing interfaith scholars that are with us today introduce themselves before we jump right into the topic. So, Jacky, since you're next to me in my square, this way, why don't you start?
Yeah, my name is Jacky. I'm a junior, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a non-denominational Christian.
Should I go? I can go.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey guys, I'm Max. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Jewish Interfaith Scholar, and I'm a senior, about to graduate in just a couple months time.
And I am Olivia. I am also a senior at DePaul, and I use she, her pronouns and am spiritual but non-religious.
We have chosen a variety of different topics for this Quirk Week, all topics that mean something to us at this time in our life. And I know the word self-care has been a part of our lives for a long time now, especially this last year. We are coming, hopefully, somewhere towards the end of this crazy pandemic year. At least there's some kind of light in a tunnel. And I feel like every other day someone says the word self-care to me in some context or another. And what does it mean from a faith perspective? What does it mean from a worldview or a philosophical perspective? That's what we're here to talk about today.
I think when I think about getting certain directions from my faith background when it comes to self-care, the first thing that I thought of was this idea of like the day of Sabbath. You know, I feel like there's so many systems in place that ensure that Monday is like, you know, it's the first work day, it's the first school day. And so Sundays are the days that I use personally for making sure that I have properly rested, you know, anything that I haven't done throughout the week. That's sort of when I take a moment to step back and say, okay, how am I feeling? And, you know, when I ask myself that, I usually look at 3 different facets. And that's, you know, how am I feeling spiritually, mentally, and physically? Some things that do help me is obviously like prayer, meditation. Music is a really big part of that as well. If I'm not feeling too good physically, you know, it might just be that I need to take like a quick power nap or go for a walk or do like some exercise, a quick workout here or there. And some things that I use to feel better mentally will be, you know, reading or journaling, or, you know, if I don't really feel like focusing on too much that day, I'll like watch something. Like a TED Talk or like a documentary, you know. And yeah.
Do you actually kind of go through and like journal it out or like mentally, physically, spiritually, I am this today? I know like it's weird for me to make people do like the pies check-in when we're just like in a group together, and I rarely do it by myself. So I'm not to like gotcha question, but do you actually like mentally, physically, spiritually checklist yourself? And I don't know. I like it seems like such an interesting practice. I don't know if I would ever have the discipline to do it.
Sometimes if I'm lazy, I'm like, you know, it is resting could just be just laying here and doing nothing for some time. But I think usually those kind of things do make me feel worse. And, you know, I think some degree of productivity is helpful. As far as like a checklist, it's all mental. I don't have a whole list of, you know, if I achieve this, this, and this today, I'll feel better and, you know, more productive. So yeah, I think journaling is a big part of it, but it's not necessarily in the sense of writing things down to make sure I accomplish certain goals. It might just be writing down how I'm feeling, or like, you know, I call them mind dumps. You know, sometimes it's good to just get it all out on paper, and then it makes it more clear in your head. So
I was curious, Jacky, when you talk about like prayer or meditation in terms of self-care, are you going to that place to seek like guidance for what you need to do, or is the simple act of just like being in that space and connecting with your spirituality sort of the self-care in and of itself?
I guess if I do sort of need guidance, you know, prayer does help a lot with that. But, you know, even in the blog post I wrote about like mindfulness, I'm always just trying to, I find most peace and most serenity when I'm just present, you know. I get a lot of anxiety thinking about the future or thinking about the past. I overthink a lot. And so I think the whole idea of like meditating or doing those kinds of things is just to center myself.
I really appreciate that you separate the physical, spiritual, and mental aspects, because I think so often it's easy for us to say, oh, well, I'm physically fine, so I must be fine, or I'm mentally fine, so I must be fine. And I think that a lot of people often forget about that spiritual aspect and forget about the fact that all three of those are independent from each other. So you could feel physically fine and mentally fine and be spiritually really whacked out. And so I appreciate that you like keep all of them in mind, and that the only once you can answer all three of those can you determine what kinds of self-care you need.
Right. And it took a lot of practice at first, because I feel like the two kind of sometimes will overlap, you know?
Yeah, totally. Like mentally and spiritually overlap.
Yeah, those two especially. Yeah, I feel like sometimes you could be feeling mentally foggy and you feel like it's your spirit that's drained, but it's not, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Totally.
yeah.
It's actually interesting because both Matt and Jacky said things that are very relevant to me. So, Jacky, I want to talk about my like interest in what you said, because you're talking about the day of rest and how the day of rest is like the day that we think of as like our check-in with ourselves. And it's just so interesting because my day of rest is Saturday, not Sunday. I really appreciate what you talk about, the idea that, okay, most people say that the week starts on Sunday, but actually it starts on Monday because that's the beginning of the week, and then Sunday is the day of rest. And I mean, interestingly enough, it took Jews a really long time in history to get to the point where we could have a 2-day weekend so that we could actually have our day of rest off. So when I think of a day of rest, there's like really conflicting feelings sometimes, because in the past we've had our day of rest taken from us, or like, you know, because Christianity is the general like American religion, you know, or like we're based off the Gregorian calendar, things like that. Judaism just kind of gets pushed by the wayside, and our day of rest kind of gets pushed aside, which is interesting. But I mean, in my whole life, Saturday has always been my weekend and my day of rest. So I really relate to your day of rest as well, and I think it's interesting to see that they are different. In Judaism, we have our mitzvot, the term mitzvah, I'm sure lots of people have heard. And mitzvah loosely translates to a good deed. It directly translates to a commandment. A mitzvah is a commandment, a thing you have to do in the Jewish faith. And one mitzvah is to be there for others when they are in need. So it's huge in Judaism to be there for the family of somebody who recently passed away. It is essential to be there for somebody who is currently sick. It is essential to be there for somebody who just had a child, for somebody who just moved into a new house, for somebody who is hosting you, anybody. You have to be there. It is your job as a Jew to be there for another person. But Hillel makes a really good point that we're being told that we have to be there for other people. But in order to be there for other people, we have to be there for ourselves first. I think that's something that we kind of forget about, or it's just very easy to push by the wayside a little bit. So there's not a lot of like direct in Judaism, this is what you do to self-care. It's more just the idea of, in order for you to uphold the commandments as a Jew, you have to care for yourself. And everybody does that differently. So I'm not wrapped right now because my hair is still drying, but one way that I self-care and I kind of attach it to my Jewish tradition is that I will spend some time in the morning covering my hair and setting an intention for my day, so that every time I look in the mirror and I see that my hair is covered, I remember this was the intention that I set for the day. Usually at the beginning of the week, my intentions are something like, I am going to actually have a productive day today and get X, Y, and Z done. Maybe if I'm meeting somebody new, my intention for the day would be, I'm going to be open to new experiences and be honest with myself about my level of comfortability and what's going on, you know? So that's how I ensure my self-care, by reminding myself about these intentions. And they kind of have a Jewish aspect to them because traditionally Jewish men cover their heads as a sign of respect to God and a reminder that God is there and God is watching over us. So yeah, that's kind of my self-care stuff. When I was living at my parents' house, it was definitely a little bit more common and often that I would really check in on Saturdays. Now that I'm living on my own and I live in a non-Jewish household, my roommates aren't Jewish. When I was living with my parents though, Friday night, we would eat dinner together every night, but Friday night we ate dinner in the dining room. And we took our time to like ask about the week. How's it been? How's it been going? Because Jews, we start our holidays at night. So when I say Saturday, I mean Friday night to Saturday night. So when I was living there, I would be using that time to check in. And then many Jews, when you hear the term like keeping Shabbat, that means that you don't do certain things on the day of rest. So those certain things, and this is not every Jew, but using electricity, having money exchange hands. Those are like the two big things. Yeah, you can't be working, exchanging money, doing these things that would be any kind of work or effort.
The assumption from God is that you're working on self-care, or you're not working. You're non-working on self-care on Shabbat. But I'm glad. Thank you for explaining that. Like, there's some very specific, very harsh rules for observant Jews about like what is resting.
Right.
On Shabbat. So yeah.
You just clearly said like it's really good to have people that sort of hold you accountable, and the second you're out of those communities, it's kind of hard to keep up with those things.
Yeah, no, totally. Absolutely. Yeah, even just like some religious traditions. I have lots of friends who say the Shema every night before they go to bed. And the Shema is the prayer that basically says, Adonai, our Lord, ruler of the universe, Adonai is one, God is one, one God. And it's a very short, simple prayer. Children learn it as soon as they can talk. I think that was the very first prayer that I ever learned. And for a long time when I was young, I would use that just as like a meditative centering practice almost before you go to bed. Or lighting the candles on Shabbat, or even, I don't know, just checking in like in a Jewish setting can be I think you're right, Jacky. It is all about the community. It's all about the people around us. And because in Judaism, we have to self-care so that we will be able to care for others, it makes sense that it's a very community-based thing.
Judaism's pretty good about ritualized objects, like triggering intent.
Yes.
Like that's thousands of years of like little string around the finger reminders of like, oh yeah, I was supposed to, oh yeah, I'm supposed to, oh yeah, right?
I've been to church a couple of times with my roommate, and when I go to church, there's lots of like standing, sitting, kneeling, right? That's things that we see. Jews also do that a lot: standing, sitting, bowing, kneeling, also singing out loud and having different people come up for different prayers. And there's a lot of action in Judaism.
My spiritual identity is spiritual but not religious, which is a weird identity to claim because it's like in absentia of religion, but whatever. So I was thinking about self-care in relation to that identity, and the idea that for most people who claim that identity, they are sort of there's a direct link between that identity and certain practices that they do have that others or themselves may consider self-care or self-oriented or inwardly oriented practices. So it's difficult to sort of speak on those. There are many approaches, many sources of guidance on that. So I sort of just have to speak from an individual place on this whole topic. But in general, there's many things I do for self-care. Unlike you all with your sort of set out days of rest or these sort of patterns and cycles that you attend to for rest based upon your religions, I don't really have that, so it has to be more of a daily practice thing for me. So I'll just speak on one. One thing I do is intentional movement, be that dance, yoga, stretching, anything like that. I have to do every day. And it's not just to sort of like check off those like physical, spiritual, mental boxes. It definitely helps with that as well. But it's more so about sort of focusing my conscious awareness on the parts of my being that are not just my thoughts, because for the most part, I'm just thinking of my perspective or vision of reality from here, and that's a very like limiting and often dangerous place, because we do naturally experience these sort of just waves of being an intention and motivation that act as truth, but are not. Just reminding myself that I am in a body that is connecting, is sensing, is feeling the world in ways that I'm not always aware of, helps me to practice just like patience with myself and others, and just sort of, a general sense of well-being overall, that I just am safe, am healthy, am present, all of those things. And that sort of relates to a quote that I often look towards a poet named Rumi, who I believe comes from the Sufi perspective. But he says that your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. So whether that's a physical barrier that you're holding a lot of just like tension in different parts of your bodies, or you're just carrying your anxieties in certain ways that aren't allowing you to fully practice that patience and presence with other people, or whether you have mental barriers, traumas, things that you need to work through and heal. Any of these things, that's how I view self-care in its relation to ultimately acting out my spiritual sense of well-being in the world.
I'm curious, what is like an example or two of like other, I mean, you said, excuse me, you said like physical movement. I know that's really important to you, especially with climbing and things like that. I'm curious, like what are some other like actual actions that you take for self-care?
Outside of the movement stuff?
Yeah, like another one. Because the thing is, I feel like with a spiritualist identity, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I also identify as myself as like a spiritualist Jew, and for me, my when I'm doing things to connect with my spirituality, it can really be almost anything as long as you're thinking about it in a like self-care and spiritual way. So I'm curious of what else you might do.
Yeah. Well, I'm also a big believer in just like that we carry with us all the time these like unfulfilled sort of capacities, like that there's always room to grow and learn, and putting yourself in experiences that allow you to prove or remind yourself that you do have these, like, not that you're like not full or not enough, but that there is always more room to move into. So a lot of times, my favorite thing to do is like to craft and build things. And that is a very just like human, tangible sort of work-based thing that is often connected with productivity and skill in our society. But I take it from a much more spiritual place. I try to really disconnect it from money and work, and more so in just proving to myself that like I have within me the creativity and capacity to build a thing that's never been built before, to do a thing that's never been done before, and just sort of reminding myself of that is a very like spiritual but also self-care practice that makes me feel more capable of facing just the unexpected tragedy of life oftentimes. And so in moments where I'm not actively facing these challenges, sort of creating these light and fun challenges for myself by way of creative pursuits helps me to sort of be able to face those other times with a bit more confidence and love and patience and all of that.
On a personal note, I also think, in my opinion, it's very spiritual when you share your art with your friends.
I definitely, agree. And collaborating with other people, just sort of removing, that like ego-based vision of what you're creating, and instead making it like a collaborative effort, I think is is spiritual in that connection, self-caring in that, just like, I don't know, but you get it. But yeah, I definitely see all my creative pursuits, all of my movement pursuits, as ultimately preparing me to better live out this, love and connection that I hope to build. That's not necessarily centered in my religion, but is very much a spiritual imperative for me in my life.
I love the idea of getting away from egocentric, like either art or activity in general.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it sounds so paradoxical, right? That like you need to remove the ego of yourself to do really good self-care. And
Mm-hmm.
all of you mentioned something very similar, that like it takes the whole community to do self-care. It's not like it's your job as a Jew to be there for others, and you can only be there when you are like at peace with yourself to then be there for others. And to remove the ego from your art and share it. It's like that's how you get to that next kind of level, that cooperative level, that spiritual level, that connection. Like it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take this and write some thesis paper over here about the idea of removing ego from self-care, because that's really, I think we've hit on an interesting kind of idea here, that in all of our faith perspectives, it's kind of, while you need to pay attention to yourself, removing yourself from being the ultimate focus of attention is probably one of the best ways to actually go for is to do some real self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any kind of like quote or Bible verse that maybe guides you in your self-care, or guides the idea of self-care in your faith tradition? I mean, Matt used the Hillel quote, which is totally a quote that I would have used as well. There is another quote from Deuteronomy, if I can find it, if I can pull it up, that says, "Guard yourself and guard your soul very carefully." That's Deuteronomy 4:19. That I think, for me, that's pretty relevant, that we're being told that we need to care for ourselves and we need to make sure that we are guarded and safe. So does anybody else have like a quote from scripture or other sources?
I shared my roomie one, but I also had another one that one of my teachers in high school used to say, and she was a Buddhist, but she used to say that you're the foods you eat, the company you keep, and the habits that you make. Everything else is just an emotional attachment. And that was very revolutionary to my little 16-year-old brain. And I definitely think that there is more to life and being than those things, but oftentimes I'll look to that if I'm feeling just very off balance, to bring my intention back to what I'm putting in my body, who I'm surrounding myself with, the practices I'm keeping every single day, as a vision of myself that's removed from the sometimes more judgmental and emotional version of myself that I'm viewing at that time. So I thought that was sort of nice and connected with what we're talking about.
I love that quote.
Yeah, I think the Deuteronomy verse that you shared was really powerful, and props to you. That's a very interfaithy thing to do. But yeah, there's one verse that immediately came to mind for me, and I've just found it because, when I was younger, I think the idea of meditation always stood out to me. And, I used to be very spiritual before it was rooted in anything per se. And, a lot of people would be like, oh, well, no, like what's that saying? An empty mind is the devil's playground or whatever. And, all of these kinds of things until I finally found a Bible verse that allowed me to continue with meditation. And it's Philippians 4, verse 8. And in the New King James Version, it says, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are good of report, if there is any virtue and if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. And all of those are just such beautiful adjectives. And I think that's just the way that it sounded, that's kind of like the space that I want to be in when I'm clearing my head and only letting in, good thoughts and positive thoughts. It's a lot of what Olivia was saying about, you can get just so caught up in your own brain sometimes. And I tend to get very caught up in negative thinking. Sometimes you're not even aware that it's negative and that it's detrimental to your mental health. So yeah, I would say that's a verse that gets me through meditation.
Good question, too. I'm thinking on it quickly myself. I would love to say all I do is just think about Torah quotes all day. They just run through my mind constantly, and all I do is just love on the Torah. No, that's not how it goes. In fact, I'm sure there are many people out there who that is their life, but it is not like that for me. And when I think about like self-care and things that are motivating me to do self-care, I was sitting here kind of racking my brain thinking, like, what are quotes that actually mean something to me? Because it's not like I sit and go through Torah a lot in my head when I'm thinking about self-care. Because like Max said, there's not a lot of direct, here's what the Torah says about self-care. There's some general ideas. I was thinking one of the quotes I think that actually races through my mind most, that actually really does affect my being and my way of thinking and my way of acting, is from Shakespeare in Hamlet, where he says, "This above all, to thine own self be true." And I think about that quote often when I'm thinking, like, what am I doing this for? Am I doing this for myself? Am I doing this for someone else? Is this what the real me would actually do? And why am I doing this? And it's like that quote has always meant something to me, and it creeps in my brain in weird, like, times, conscious moments, in times I'm listening to my conscience, and has kind of sat with me in weird ways throughout my life. And so for some reason, I didn't even think that quote was going to come out of my mouth until I started thinking about it and thinking, like, oh, that quote actually changes me sometimes in what I'm about to do. So thanks, Shakespeare, for either doing or not, or helping me not do some things in my life. I don't know.
Well, you know what, Matt, that it's funny because, I mean, not funny, it's true. A lot of people, especially those involved in like the arts. I mean, my brothers were both like huge theater kids in middle school and high school, and I was not, but I know like they totally found this like spiritual identity in the plays that they were doing and engaging.
Well, I would say probably even for a lot of us, like, I'm sure the average person we're speaking to is probably gaining a lot of their insight about self-care and these kind of things from pop culture, from songs, from movies, from books, from TV, from things that they respect and they like. And so that was going to be a question that I was going to ask, and Max kind of took it and twisted it of like, is there something else outside of kind of the spiritual realm that's really speaking to your self-care? But we're kind of already inside that topic a little bit. And I was going to ask Olivia too, besides Rumi, is there any other quote that's kind of like helping you live the best life, or lyric from a song? It doesn't have to be like, it's been there for my whole life, but lately I've been really thinking about, XYZ. And that's for everybody, I guess. Is there something else that's kind of been getting you through, especially this last year or these last couple of months, or anything that's like, yeah, I keep looking at this piece of art or reading this poem over and over again, or listening to this song. I don't know. I was interested.
I actually do have a poem that I listen to a lot, or I read a lot, and I'm waiting. I have an appointment to get a line of it tattooed. but the poem Wild Geese by Mary Oliver, if you've ever read it, I don't think I'm going to read the whole thing. It is a little bit depressing.
How about just the line you're going to get?
Well, the line I'm going to get is "Meanwhile, the world goes on." So a very short line, but I mean that's true. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Gosh, the first verse is just. I'm not going to be able to say it perfectly, but it's like, you know, do you have to walk on your knees through the desert, like crawling and trying so hard to do these things, but like the world is still moving on. Like with or without you, the world still goes on.
I can see why you said it might be slightly depressing.
Definitely look at the poem though.
At the same time, yeah. No, yeah. For me, it's a lot of different things. Like I said, music is probably the biggest one. I think there's a lot of different ways that you can connect to things outside of yourself. Again, it's a lot of what Olivia was saying, where, you know, but for me, it's definitely music. I don't know how else to explain it. If I think it's just the vibrations, or, you know, just whenever I'm listening to a song that's really good, I definitely feel a very strong spiritual presence. And, you know, I struggled a long time with, you know, oh, well, what's secular, what's non-secular, and like all that kind of stuff. And like, no, I think if a song sounds good and has a very good message behind it, it's gonna help me spiritually. So.
Yeah, anytime I'm, like, every single time I'm asked about my favorite movie, favorite book, favorite quote, like, every single thing I've ever watched, read, it's gone. So.
No, I know that feeling too.
Sure, it's in there.
I agree. That is a very, the only thing that brought that idea to my brain was when Matt said poem. If he didn't say poem, I would have said I got nothing.
Thank you so much, scholars. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Stay tuned. We have a few more days coming of Quirk Live with more topics and more amazing content coming at you. Thank you again for watching. Thank you, scholars. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.